decided to utilize my platform and my space and my knowledge to hopefully educate you all, whether you're my mom, hey mom, or you're interested in medicine. I hope that you know or learn from this video that you can become a physician, whether it's with an MD degree or a DO degree. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you become a competent physician, right? And both pathways can allow you to do that. And so today we are going to have tea time. Notice how this says doctor and the degree isn't really relevant. Anyways, so let's just dive right in. Welcome back to my channel. For those that are returning, thank you for investing in me. For those who are new, my name is Untitled Chapter. I am a second-year med student at FSU College of Medicine, and this is my channel, MD Tribe. That stands for Minority Doctor Tribe. I just felt like I needed to clarify that due to today's topic. So today we're going to be talking about the social media blow up about this FIGS commercial or ad or advertisement, however you want to call it, about a DO physician that was a female that was portrayed as ditzy and uneducated because she was reading this book upside down for whatever reason. I think it was medical terminology for dummies. And yeah, there was a lot of things wrong with the ad. And there was another ad that was an RN that was also inappropriate. And for those who may not know, FIGS is this growing popular scrub company that utilizes a lot of Instagram influencers or social media influencers to promote their products to other medical professionals. Social media just blew up this week because of this. And more recently in social media, well, in media in general, we've been seeing this growing lack of information and knowledge in regards to doctors of osteopathic medicine, so DO physicians, with Dr. Conley, which is Donald Trump's physician or the president's physician. And, you know, his expertise is being questioned or his credentials are being questioned because he's a DO physician. And so people tend to be very uneducated about MDs versus DOs and how they're really so similar and not really much different. And there's this stigma that has been going on, and although we've made a lot of strides to combat the stigma in terms of DO physicians, people continue to be misinformed and just ignorant. So I decided to utilize my platform and my space and my knowledge to hopefully educate you all, whether you're my mom, hey mom, or you're interested in medicine. I hope that you know or learn from this video that you can become a physician, whether it's with an MD degree or a DO degree. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you become a competent physician, right? And both pathways can allow you to do that. And so today we are going to have tea time. Notice how this says doctor and the degree isn't really relevant. Anyways, so let's just dive right in. So MD versus DO. So MD stands for Doctors of Medicine and DO stands for Doctors of Osteopathic Medicine. The biggest distinguishing factor between MDs and DO is in the training, right? So doctors of osteopathic medicine have osteopathic manipulative therapy, also abbreviated OMT. They do about 200 additional hours in this particular training. It's basically a holistic approach, as they would call it, where they manipulate the body or the musculature of people's bodies to allow the body to heal itself. And so they also believe in, prevention, and they believe in viewing the patient as a whole and treating the patient as a whole. And so MD physicians in our training, we don't learn OMT or osteopathic manipulative therapy. Our philosophy in the MD route is termed the allopathic medicine. And so this is a more contemporary view of medicine, more research-based, and we utilize a lot of more medicinal therapies and surgery. Now, this is to say that there are doctors of osteopathic medicine that might go into practice and not utilize OMT. There's doctors of osteopathic medicine that go into practice and still use evidence-based medicine and therapies. They still use surgeries, they still use medications, and vice versa. And MDs will really not utilize OMT, but it doesn't mean that we don't view the patient as a whole or treat them holistically, right? It varies across physicians, but I think it's safe to say that all physicians aim to view the patient as a whole when they're treating them. Now, OMT is just the biggest distinguishing factor amongst us. So another thing is that there are 154 MD schools and only 37 DO schools. So obviously there's less spots. It's about a 9-to-1 ratio. And in the practicing field, only 11% of practicing physicians are DOs. One of the big things that come up when discussing MDs versus DOs is that people tend to be, worried that they're going to only be allowed to pursue primary care specialties if they go to a DO school. This is not true. Now, it's not to say that most of DOs don't go into primary care, because they do. 57% of DOs go into primary care versus in MD schools, 32% go into primary care. What is primary care? Primary care includes family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, and then some people will include OBGYN into that category, and geriatrics as well. And so the majority of DO graduates go into primary care, according to the AMA in 2018. Now, down to the training, right? So I mentioned the biggest difference of our training is DOs use OMT and MDs do not. But we both have a 4-year program. They both require you to go to medical school for 4 years. And in order to get accepted to the program, it is very similar. You need a bachelor's for both programs, MD and DO. You need to do your prereqs for both programs, which includes the bios with the labs, the chemistries with the labs, the organic chemistries with the labs, and physics, and then, your English and whatnot. And so they have very similar prerequisites in order to apply. They both require letters of recommendations. However, it is strongly recommended that if you do apply to a DO school, that you should have a letter of recommendation from a DO physician. Your experiences and your shadowing should be similar. However, when you apply to DO schools, you should have shadowing of a DO physician. You should have shadowed a DO physician. And those aren't things that are necessarily required, but most schools like to see that. And so when you're applying, make sure you double check whether the schools that you're applying to require that of you. Now, the big question is, what is harder to get into, an MD versus a DO program? And this kind of is tricky. And I think the best answer is it depends. And why do I say this? Because people like to argue that it is easier to get into DO programs because the average of their statistics is a little bit lower than MD programs. But then if you look at it in a broad picture, there is less DO spots. And it's not to say that there's less people applying. And so with less spots, you have less chances of getting in, even if their statistics are a little bit lower. versus MD schools, there is about 4 times the amount of MD schools than there is DO schools. So there's a lot more spots to offer. And so depending which way you look at it, I guess you can decide on your own. In 2018 and 2019 cycle, the average MCAT for MD schools was a 511.2. The average MCAT for DO schools in that same year was a 503.8. The average GPA for MD schools was a 3.72, and the average GPA for DO schools was a 3.54. So it's not a huge difference, but I mean, if you're borderline for any of them, it could be a big, deciding factor for you. But that's the difference, right? And it varies year to year because technically the generations are getting smarter. So at the end of the day, I think what really matters is that you're mission fit to the schools that you're applying to, because that's going to be the biggest determining factor whether they accept you or not. And so that's that. So is it harder to get into DO schools versus MD schools? I don't really know. I mean, I think getting to medical school in general is like winning the lottery. So you want to be competitive regardless of what program you apply to. And I always recommend for my mentees to apply to both, because I think you would be blessed to get accepted into any program. And they're both going to allow you to become very competent physicians. And I think that's all that matters. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and say. I applied to both programs. I applied to 5 MD schools and I applied to 3 DO schools. I was offered interviews at 2 DO schools. I was denied from 4 MD schools. FSU was the only MD school that accepted me. And by the time that I accepted my spot at FSU, I was just dead set on going to FSU because I had so much connections there already that I declined my interviews at the other 2 DO schools that I applied at. And so I applied to both with basically the same application, and I highly recommend, if you're trying to maximize your chances to go to medical school, you apply to both as well. So moving on, there's a lot of public MD schools versus DO schools. A lot of them are private, and there's definitely a big difference in cost of tuition. So if that is something that you're worried about, that is definitely something you should look into. The next thing that comes up when people discuss MD and DO schools is that DO schools tend to accept non-traditional students more. I'm not in admissions, so I can't really, speak to this. But from my experience, I think MD schools are just as much likely to accept non-traditional students. In my class in particular, we have a lot of non-traditional students. Speaking of my experience at FSU, we have a lot of non-traditional students, people that had full-blown careers before they decided to go into medicine, or like myself that took a gap year. There's people that took several gap years. And so I think if you are worried about being a non-traditional student and getting accepted into an MD school, I am speaking, proof that you can go to an MD school being a non-traditional student. So don't let that deter you. So another big difference between MD and DO programs is the board exams that you take. So traditionally for MD schools, you take the USMLE, and for DO schools, they have you take the COMLEX. And a lot of DOs, since they want to apply to residency programs, they'll also take the USMLE board exams so they can apply to those residencies as well. And to be honest, I'm not like a whole lot familiar with that whole process, just because I am a second year medical student and I haven't applied to residency myself. But doing my own research, that is what I've seen, and that is what I've heard from DOs, that they'll usually take both the COMLEX and the USMLE. Now, for residency, MDs are only allowed to go to residencies by the ACGME. And DO programs, they have the AOA residency programs, but they can also apply to the ACGME, right? So technically you can apply to more residency programs, I guess you could say, as a DO, because you have both of those options, versus if you're coming out of an MD program, you can only go through the ACGME. But as of this year, theoretically have become merged. And so the last I read was that they were set to be merged by June 30th, 2020. So theoretically, they should be merged by now. When you're applying to residency, another big concern comes up of like, is it true that DOs are less likely to match? According to the research, 95% of MDs match to residency and 70% of DOs match to residency. Yes, it was a little bit higher for MDs, but I really think at the end of the day, it comes down to like who you are as a person and what connections you make when applying to residency. So I think you're just as likely to match to a residency program if you're a very good candidate and you went to a DO school. But that's what the research says. For salary, so the concern was that as a DO physician, you get paid less than an MD physician. You're literally doing the exact same thing, but it tends to average a little bit higher for MDs. The asterisk for this that was included in the paper that I read was that MD physicians are more likely to match into non-primary care specialties, and they're more likely to subspecialize. And so those salaries tend to be higher, and that's why the average MD salary is a little bit higher. So as mentioned earlier, 57% of DO physicians go into primary care. The salaries are a little bit lower in primary care than they are in, high specialized fields. And so that's why the salary difference is that in general. So yeah, I just wanted to take the time to kind of like break down the difference between MD and DO, but really they're very similar in practical terms. Like when they're practicing, they're just as competent. My primary care physician is actually a DO, and I've worked with MD physicians, and if you remove the letters from, their white coat, you can't even tell the difference. I just thought it was very distasteful and ridiculous of what was being put on social media. And for pre-meds that, are just learning about what it takes to become a physician, I think it, deters them from going into this field because of the way they're being portrayed, like, what FIGS did. And so I just wanted to utilize my platform to bring a little bit more education and light to how similar MD and DO programs are, and how you can, get into both and become a physician just as much. But that's basically everything I had to say. Definitely don't believe everything that's put on social media, because it is not always true. A lot of ads have underlying agendas and propaganda. And although I do think some things are honest mistakes, I think the damage has been done, unfortunately. And so, there was a lot of outrage on social media, and I spoke out against it on my platform or my page. But I definitely think, action needs to happen, and FIGS did apologize, and we'll take it as it is and move on with our lives. But I definitely think I needed to take the time to highlight how similar we are, and encourage you to apply to both programs if you really want to become a physician, so you can maximize your chances. Don't knock DO off your list. And if you think that your philosophy aligns better with DO, then, go super gung-ho for DO. If you're kind of indifferent, you just want to become a physician, then apply to both. If you are stuck on MD, then just apply to MD. But at the end of the day, you're going to be working with DOs in the field at some point in your career, and they deserve the same respect of any other MD physician. Just wanted to say I support my DOs. I hear ya to all my women dealing with this misogyny in 2020 and this ridiculousness. I hear ya. I'm here for you. To everybody that's applying this cycle, good luck with your applications. If you need any help, let me know. If you need any advice, let me know. I'm always happy to help. I hope this video brought some clarity, and thank you for joining in on my tea time. And don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of Women in White Coats, and let me know what other content you want to see, because I'm going to keep making it. And for those wondering, I passed my midterm. So I'm halfway through neuro, and I am actually starting to study for my boards. So that's another exciting update on my life. I lost 10 pounds. I know I mentioned I was on my weight loss journey, but I've officially lost 10 pounds. So we're going strong. And those are pretty much all the updates I have. Keep up with me through my Instagram. And yeah, stay safe, y'all.